So let's now look at our shade and our shadows. Let's turn these layers on here. This is always even nice, just the watercolor effect over the white imagery, and you can see maybe our interior is a little nicer. That's given that little bit of life for that yellow in the background. And again, we can always adjust that. That's what's so great about this. So going into our shade and shadows, let's deal with just our shading first. So I'm turning shadows off. And again, as before, I like just keeping my originals in case I want to come back in and change something. So I'm going to turn those off, come into shading, Control J to make a copy of it, pulling it outside of my originals. So now we're dealing with the shading. I'm actually going to turn off everything else just so I can focus on my shading. And what I want to do is actually get rid of the white. I just really want to deal with the colors, you know, this shading. And so the best way of doing that is I'm going to make a second layer, put it underneath so I can keep the name. You'll see in a second. And if I double click the layer, it gives me these blending options. And if I just drop this white down just a little bit, you can see it starts taking away the white. You know, the more you go, it'll get into the grays, and then the lighter grays, then darker grays, and it gets rid of everything. So it's really how far you want to take it. Really sticking to right around 250 tends to get rid of just the whites I want to get rid of. Though theoretically the white's not gone, it's just blended away. So that's why I'm creating this second layer. And if I group these two layers, the second layer that has nothing on it, and merge layers, it actually now physically gets rid of the white. And again, that's partly why I keep the original, just so I always have a base version in case I want to do something with it. And so what I want to do on my shade and shadow is I want to go back here and I want to do the whole group under multiply, because I want to be able to multiply this layer. And so I'm going to come down here, even though it's not doing anything yet because it has nothing to multiply to, that's fine, it's just going to be set. And then similar to what we did with the interior lighting, I want to add an adjustment layer, and we're going to do a hue saturation again, and we're going to call this shade coloring. And again, I'm going to press Alt and link it to just my shading. We're going to colorize this, and now you can see I can colorize this whole thing in. And what's nice by doing this adjustment layer is I can continually come back and adjust the color. I'm not setting it, and I'm not damaging the layer underneath. But I'm going to come in here and find like this nice, these purples, you know, make it go a little darker, though it takes some of the saturation out. The purples always seem to work really well for shade and shadow. So I think that'll work. You know, we can test it out. If I don't like it, nice, I can come back here and adjust it again. So let's turn our base image on, and we can really start getting a feel. And you can see this purple giving this shade is really nice now. Even though it's pretty heavy, and we're going to get into that in a second, you can see how we can really control the shade and the shadow by the way we exported these out in different layers. So two things to note. Number one is you can see that my shade, since we did this without landscaping, I have an issue of I have shading going across my tree here. And two, it's definitely way too dark. Both are pretty easily corrected because I'm going to select my shadow or my shade layer, and using my vegetation mask, I'm going to click on my vegetation, and I'm going to come in here and create a mask over it. Again, it's backwards, so just Control I to switch it, and you can see that that now masks out my shading around my vegetation, which is exactly what I want. And then the second thing is how dark it is. I'm going to use my opacity, and we can really adjust and get to a level, you know, if we want it dark, you know, give it a dramatic shade effect, or just enough to really make some things pop. Really, it's up to you. It's up to the image. It's, you know, really what's going on. That 40% seems to work pretty nice. So you can see the difference, that it's just really adding to this level, to the level of depth and detail to this thing. So we're going to do something similar with the shadow. So I was going to group these two together to call shade. I'm going to come back to my originals. I'm going to duplicate my shadow and pull it up out of my originals folder. Turn off originals. And so we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to turn shade off and turn shadows on. So now we're just dealing with shadows. And even that, you can see, is kind of a cool effect, how we can really control the shadows. And this is where, again, it's really important that our timestamps are coordinated between SketchUp and our rendered image, because again, this one's our rendered, because this one has shadows already, and but that's okay, because we can just even tweak them a little bit more using this, or we don't even have to use it. But if we do this on top of our SketchUp exported image, then we now have shadows that we can really play with. So we can go ahead and start adjusting this. So again, we're going to do the same thing. I want to get rid of the white, and you'll see what I'm saying. I'm going to turn off my base file, so I'm dealing with just my shadow layer. And we're going to come in here and we're going to knock this down again to about 250. So that gets rid of all the white. So now it's really just an export of the variation of shading, or of shadowing levels. And I'm going to merge this with a blank layer, which we now have just the shade cropped out from what we're looking for. So again, I'm going to add a adjustment layer of hue and saturation, and we will call this shadow coloring. And again, using Alt key, I'm going to link it to just that one. We're going to colorize. And again, we're going to find a nice purple. We're going to maybe go a little darker, but take some of the saturation out. Even though we adjusted things with opacity on the shade, you can even always, you know, adjust it here and make these just ever so light shadows that we're dealing with. So there's really multiple ways of adjusting this, and again, that's such the great part about this process. As well as we can always come back in here and continually adjust it as we need to. I'm going to group this together and call it shadows. And so now you can see that we're, if we add our base image, we really have some nice shadows going on. Again, it's a little dark, so we can always play with the opacity. Again, maybe let's stick with 40. It seems to be working well. That's giving a lot of character to this thing, a lot of depth. So the other thing I want to play with and show you is I'm actually going to move this. See if I can do this. I think I can move my my adjustment layer and link it to the group. No, I can't. That's okay. So anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make a copy of this, and I'm going to turn this off, turn my base layer off. So again, I have two copies of my edited shadow layer, and what I want to do is, since this is straight out of SketchUp, SketchUp shadows will be these very hard edge shadows, which is fine. Again, that could be an effect you're looking for. But what I want to do is come in here and do blur, Gaussian blur, and you can see I can really play with getting something a little bit more more scattered in lighting effects. I can really drop this down, make it hard lined. I can really bump it way up and go way overboard. Or I can find that place that just seems to just take the soft or the hardness out of the shadow and give just a little bit of softness. Maybe something right about there. And I'm going to copy this adjustment layer and bring it here, and I'm going to link it. And so I'm going to group, this is my original one, which this one is hard shadows, and I'm going to link this one and call this one my soft shadows. And I just want to use my soft shadows for right now. Although, let me see here. I just want to make sure, yeah, my hard shadows are on. I'm going to set the opacity for the group at like 40%, and then turn it off. And then same thing here. My soft shadows, let's bring this down to 40%. And if I turn my base layer back on, here we go. Now we have some soft shadows that are really kicking in. And so anyway, you can see the difference between hard shadows and really where it doesn't play very well is these trees. You can see the hard lines of these trees, which is fine, but it's not great. So now if we do the soft shadows, it feels so much more realistic. I usually leave landscaping on when I do shadow exports, for that reason, so I can get these nice landscape shadows on my building and whatnot. But you can see I tend to get these halo effects around the leaves. So you can always come in here and I can even add a mask if I wanted to, and with my brush come in here and maybe edit this out. Get rid of the shadows underneath my tree. I don't need the tree to be that dark. This could even be done for other areas. Maybe it's too dark under here. We don't want it that dark, or maybe you do. It's just what's great is having options. You can really control things doing it this way. And so what's really cool too is even having blurred my shadows, it gives the corners some nice roundness to them versus being such hard edges, because that doesn't really exist in the world. But so between the soft shadows and the shade, it gives enough of a definition with the shadows, with the shading, but the shadows really give a little bit of softness to it. So I think the two play very well together. And so that's how, so you can see that adding in my shadows and my shading really starts giving a lot of depth to this, especially here at the coins, where it's giving that the line work a little bit more love, so it doesn't feel so white. Again, turning my shadow lines off. You can see a little bit here, it's just getting a little bit washed out, so this is just really giving a lot of depth to it. So you can see if I start adding all my layers back on, my line work, maybe coming back, the line work might be too heavy, so that we can come back in here and adjust the opacity of this. Maybe let's drop it down just a little bit more. Maybe that's feeling a little bit better. So we're getting pretty complete here. Really the next step is going to be coming in and really adjusting maybe the actual base image itself. I think one of the things we're really going to want to do is make this stone pop a little more. It's not quite popping the way I want it to. It's getting really washed out, especially if we look at our original image. Let me turn all this off and come to our base images. We can look at, you can see the stone is much more much darker than what it's really showing on this rendering. So we're going to come back in and play with that and really make that pop. We'll play with the windows a little bit more, even maybe the wood a little bit more. So we're really going to I think start having a lot more fun And we can see by adding in some of these other layers or other backgrounds, what kind of effect we can get. Again, just putting that one on, we can see what it looks like underneath this. Yeah, so there's, here's a very more of a watercolory version, or here's a watercolory with some sketchy effects. This is straight out of SketchUp, our color map. This one's straight out of SketchUp as well. So again, you can see that there's many levels as to what you can do. This is the SketchUp base color map with the watercolor filter run in Photo Sketcher, so you can see that's even looking nice. And really, again, this is where the shade and shadow really comes in effect, is applying it on top of the SketchUp exported versions, because again, we exported the SketchUp, as you can see here, with no shade, no shadow whatsoever. It's extremely flat until we come in and really mess with the shade and the shadow, and what a difference that is. So again, this is without a rendering. This is straight from SketchUp, so we can get a lot of effects and make it look really nice. Especially these shadows that have a nice blurred edge to the shadows. You don't get that in SketchUp. SketchUp will only give you hard line edges. And the last one I think we have is, that's the one what we're using. That's just my original version of it. So yeah, so you can see there's all kinds of ways that we can take this, and just by turning layers on and off, we can really change the effect of what we're doing. Again, going back to our splatter, that just instantly gives it a warmer feel versus a cooler feel versus somewhere in between. And again, this one is very fun as well. So many different colors going on. It just gives such a great effect to it. So anyway, we'll get into some of our final editing in the next video, and start exporting out some final images.